So what's going to happen now is these budget conferees are going to meet. This is where there's going to be an attempt to be another grand bargain. And we are already seeing the fix the debt people get out in front. Understand, the only thing that has prevented a grand bargain in the past is the administration and the Democrats' demands that we have new increased tax revenue. Now, this revenue could still come in the form of simply closing loopholes. Loopholes are very easily opened up again. But even still, Grover Norquist has chosen to score that as a tax increase, thereby preventing the Republicans for moving ahead on that grand bargain. Cue the deficit scolds, cue the establishment center, some of whom come in the form of Thomas Friedman and his ridiculously titled piece yesterday, Honey, I Ate the Kids, or Sorry Kids, I Ate the... I don't know what it was. I may talk about that, but this one's even more relevant. Ezra Klein, writing in Bloomberg as opposed to the Wonk blog. Now, I have a couple of theories on why this piece shows up in Bloomberg as opposed to the Wonk blog. Partially because Bloomberg is a side gig for him. Wonk blog's his baby. He would not write something that was not fully formed on the Wonk blog, but, you know, if you're going to send it off to Bloomberg at a time where you're focused on some other stuff, hey, what are you going to do? You know how it is. We all have tiers of priorities. And I save my best stuff for this program. If I'm going and doing some other program, then, I may not save my best stuff. So Ezra Klein yesterday in Bloomberg on October 16th writes, Democrats should surrender on taxes. Now, when I first saw this headline, I was going to go ballistic. And then I saw how muddled the piece is, and it's a little bit harder for me to do so. But understand on some level, look, there is a desire by centrists to have a grand bargain. Just as President Obama wants to have as his legacy this grand bargain, entitlement reform, so too do the establishment aspirational David Broderites want to be part of that era as well. Ezra Klein writes, this will be the eighth major budget commission since 2010. Until now, every single one of them has failed for the same reason: taxes. If nothing changes, this one will fail too. But something should change. Democrats should admit the obvious. For the time being, they've lost on taxes. And you know what? That's okay. Or at least it could be if they were willing to admit it and smartly negotiate the terms of their surrender. For Democrats, the idea behind sequestration was that the defense cuts would be so objectionable to Republicans that it would force them to cut a deal that raised taxes. Now, I would also argue that that was not the only idea there. For some reason, despite the fact that President Obama has said in every opportunity available that he wants to engage in entitlement reform, and cutting entitlements, no one attributes that agenda to him. Yet Democrats made a mistake. Protecting defense spending isn't a top priority for today's Republican Party. He says there are some exceptions, but in the main, that is what the Republican Party feels. He goes on to say most elected Republicans see sequestration as a huge victory for them. So do crucial unelected Republicans. And he goes on to say it's not that they like those cuts. They don't like the attacks on defense spending. And they don't like the fact that it exempts things like Social Security, Medicare, and food stamps. But it does one thing Republicans love. It locks in $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction without a dime in new tax revenue. And I would add also cuts programs that help poor people. And they intend to hold on to that win for dear life. To put it plainly, Democrats aren't going to persuade Republicans to lift sequestration in return for a mix of entitlement cuts and tax increases. At this point, the Republican opposition to taxes has nothing to do with policy. It's religion, it's dogma, it's identity. Refusing to raise taxes is what it means to be a Republican. The worst mistake Democrats could make would be to become a mirror image of the Republicans on the tax issue. Now, this makes no sense. The mirror image of Republicans on the tax issue would be to hold up the debt ceiling and demand higher taxes. Not to hold up a deal that would presumably provide we don't know what, but would almost definitely include cuts to Social Security. So there's no way for the Democrats to become the mirror image of Republicans in this instance, unless you untether agendas from their tactics. He goes on to say, Republicans are cannibalizing everything they care about: defense, deficit reduction, their chances of retaking the Senate to keep taxes low. Now, just 7 graphs before, he said protecting defense spending isn't a top priority for today's Republicans Party. And before that, he said they already got $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction. They don't care about deficit reduction. They care about deficit reduction on the backs of everybody except for anybody who might be taxed. That's different from deficit reduction. And in fact, I would argue they don't even care about deficit reduction. It's just a way for them to somehow justify cutting taxes, which makes no logical sense, but it sells. And they're not logical.
How much more do you need to experience of them to get that they are fundamentally not logical?
So then he goes on to say the budget debate should be a growth debate. And Democrats' top priority shouldn't be higher taxes. It should be growth. And to be sure, the distribution of that growth. When the Budget Commission sits down, Democrats should expand the playing field. Now, this is where he gets really vague, and I think he had to get it was on deadline. First, they should realize that sequestration is the best opportunity they've ever had to cut defense spending, and that $1 in defense cuts is exactly as effective as $1 in new revenue at relieving pressure on social services. That is, if they can convince the Republicans, without any tax cuts in the mix, to spend more on social programs. I don't know why there's any belief that that would be the case. Second, he says, Democrats should realize the objective need for tax increases is less than it was in 2011. And he's saying this is because the deficit has shrunk so much and projections are better. But this is also a means in which to redistribute the wealth. The idea is that taxes is not supposed to just bring down the deficit. And in many cases, who cares about the deficit? It's also a way to fund programs that we need. Third, they should see their leverage clearly. Republicans badly want entitlement cuts, but they don't want them enough to trade for taxes. Okay, so the first leverage is, according to the Democrats, is assessed that you have leverage if you offer up entitlement cuts. But it's not so much leverage that you'll get more taxes. The Republicans badly want to replace sequestration, which I don't see self-evident at all, but not enough to trade for taxes. And they badly want tax reform, but again, not enough to trade for higher taxes. So what is this secret thing that Ezra Klein is suggesting the Democrats use to supposedly get more spending for social programs? Well, of course, it's going to be the social insurance programs. Or it's going to be relieving the pressure on defense for the sequestration cuts. But if you do that, where's the money to spend on social programs? This doesn't make sense. So the only other thing would be tax reform, i.e., less revenue. So tax cuts, which would provide you no money to provide for those social programs. Democrats should use their leverage to get something they actually want. Immigration reform and infrastructure investment are obvious places to start. So what he is suggesting here is give up spending on anything other than infrastructure investment, offer cuts to entitlements, offer more money to defense in exchange for immigration reform. Yet we know that immigration reform, the obstruction by the Republicans, is a political loser for them. And we know that cutting entitlements would be a political loser for the Democrats. So what he's talking about is a political disarmament and also cuts to Social Security. I don't know how else to read this. And it is, again, because they simply want a deal. And remember, change CPI, as painful as it will be for you as a senior citizen, it will not in any way make a serious dent into the perceived problem with Social Security. Because if 20 years of solvency is not enough, then why would 30 years of solvency mean anything anyways? And then all it means is next time around, they're just going to have to cut Social Security more. If you really insist on having Social Security join essentially the U.S. Post Office and having a 75-year infinite horizon on fully funding it, then all you need to do is lift the cap on Social Security payroll taxes. The rest of this is goop. So now what we're going to hear for the next 2 months is this pressure on Democrats to cave. I mean, the bottom line is we know the only reason why we have not gotten cuts to Social Security at this point is because of Democratic insistence on raising revenue. That is it. They are in a defensive posture, and they're doing it for one reason and one reason alone, or two reasons. One is they don't have the House, and two is they don't have someone who is going to hold the line in the White House. On the contrary, it's not even that he's not holding the line. He's drawn the line somewhere else. And there is a refusal, it seems. I don't know what is more explicit than President Obama's agenda to cut Social Security. And there's a refusal for it to be acknowledged by people like Ezra Klein. Even in Bloomberg, where presumably it would not impact his sort of liberal branding.